Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be creating some high-end farmhouse decor using dollar store items. Let's go ahead and get started on our first project, which will be some farm animal signs. Using 3 of these signs from Dollar Tree, I believe I purchased these last year. They were in my stash. If you can't find them this year, they measure 5 inches by 6 3/4 inches. I removed the hangers as well as the tags, and then I filled in each one of those holes where the hangers were with some wood putty. It was fast drying, so by the time I finished the third one, the first one was dry and I could sand it down nice and smooth. Now we're going to cover these with some quart paint stir sticks. You can find these in a package of 30 at Lowe's for $1. I'm going to use 5 for each sign, and I'm beginning by cutting the rounded tip off of each of the ends. Then I can use the first one to hold in place to make my marking to cut that down to size and use that as a template to cut the remaining 4. Now one of them you will have to trim down because it will only fit 4 full pieces, and the 5th piece will have to trim down. So I'm going to place all of those in there, push them to each other very tightly, and then hold that 5th one in place to make the mark at the top and the bottom. So I'll know how to draw my line and know exactly how much I need to trim off. I find that it's easier to use a utility knife to score it a couple of times and then cut it with your scissors so that it doesn't splinter and break. Once I know everything's going to fit perfectly, I'm going to remove them in the order that I have them placed in there so that when I glue each one down, I know everything is going to fit. I'm going to glue each one with some hot glue and making sure I push tightly from one stick to the next to make sure I don't have any gaps. Once everything is glued down, I'm going to do that for the other 2 sides as well, and make sure you remove all of your glue strands because now we're going to apply some antique wax using a paintbrush and a wet baby wipe. I'm going to apply it all over the craft sticks, including the inside sides of the sign as well as the top rim of the sign, and then take that wet baby wipe and blend everything in and lighten it up a little bit. As far as the outside edges, because those signs were painted, I'm going to use the paintbrush and apply that to all 4 sides of each of the signs, but I'm not going to wipe that off with the baby wipe. I'm just going to apply 1 coat on each side, and once I get it fully covered, I can take my paintbrush while it's still wet and create lines to make it look like faux wood. Again, I'll do that for all 3 sides, and I'm going to make sure that everything is completely dry before I cover the backs of each of these up because I want it to have a very nice finished look. I'm going to take some craft paper and just trace and cut out the size I need for each of the back of the signs. I'll then attach that using just a regular glue stick. And once I have that in place, if there's any excess on the outside edging, you can just flip that over and trim it down with a pair of scissors or a utility knife. And this is going to give you such a clean and finished look. Now, using 3 of these metal animal hanger signs from Dollar General, they were $1 a piece. I'm going to take some pliers and uncoil each of the ends so that I can remove all of these hangers. Then I'm going to use some plastic wood putty. This is very fast drying. I'm going to apply this onto each one of the signs where the holes are with a regular craft stick. You can also use caulk. So by the time I finished the third one, the first one was dry, and I'm going to take some very fine grit sandpaper and sand those down nice and smooth. Clean those up, and then we're going to head outside and use some Krylon Fusion all-in-one spray paint in the color Hammered Silver. This did take 3 coats because it's a pretty thick paint and it's going to give us that nice hammered look. Make sure you allow it to thoroughly dry before you handle it and move on to the next step. So it just gives it a beautiful finish. It has a nice hammered thick look to it, and I do want to rust up the edges a bit. You could skip this process if you don't like the distressing, but I'm going to take some antique wax, dip my brush down into the antique wax, wipe most of it off, and then apply this around all of the edging for each one of these metal signs. To me, it just gives it an added dimension, and I really like the way it looks, especially when we place these onto our signs. So I'm making sure that I have those small pieces that we cut for the craft sticks all facing to the bottom so everything looks cohesive and consistent. And I'm using E6000 to apply all over the back of each one of the metal signs and then place this into the sign. I chose to place them all touching the bottom, but you could put them in the center or however you like. Then you're going to want to set something heavy on it to allow that E6000 to get a good strong hold. Now, what I love about this project is you can style it in so many different ways. You can group them together or set them out individually, but I love how this project turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. Project number 2, we're using 2 of these beautiful birds from Dollar General. They are $1 a piece. They're pretty heavy. I think they're made of either cement or concrete, but they're not resin, so they're very, very sturdy. Using Folk Arts white chalk paint in the color White Cottage, I'm going to give the top half of the bird 3 coats to cover up that metallic color and 1 coat at the bottom. So the bottom had this beautiful detailed concrete white look. So we'll bring that out a little bit later on in the project. I'm taking a black oil-based Sharpie, or any black Sharpie will do, and I'm filling in the eyes as well as some of the beak. Now, I originally was going to leave some of the whites of the eyes, but I decided to go back in and color those up. Then I'm taking some sandpaper. We're going to bring out the detail of that concrete at the bottom. And this is going to give it just a gorgeous distressed look, but really bring out those feather details. Now, we're not going to do this at the top because the top has that metallic color on it, and we're just bringing out the gray for the bottom. As I was distressing this, I thought that the eyes were just too stark. It was just too dark and glossy. So I dry brushed white paint over top of that. And then I decided, I'm just going to cover it up. And once it dries, I'll come back in and sand it down and bring out some of the detail in the eyes and the beak. Now I'm going to show you another way you can distress it is by using some antique wax and dry brushing over top of it to bring the detail out in the wings, at the top half and bottom half of the bird. It just depends on how you want to style it or what you're pairing it with. And depending on what color you want to distress it. I like it both ways. I love that beautiful white with then the gray distressing at the bottom. But I also love this one with the antique wax because it looks really woodsy and goes along really well with like wood and green colors. Now I'm taking some sandpaper and kind of bringing out the eyes and the beak, and I think it just gave it a better detail than just the starkness of that oil-based Sharpie. But it's just a personal preference on how, you want to style these or how you want to distress them. Either way, I think each one of them turned out really beautiful. You'll have to let me know which one you like better. If you like it with just the white at the top and then the distressing at the bottom, or if you kind of like that antique wax with the distressing all over. Either way, I think they're beautiful, and I think it just depends on what you pair it with that really brings out the beauty in each one of these birds. If you're enjoying today's projects and you haven't done so already, I would love for you to become a part of our community here at Country Lily DIY Decor by clicking on that subscribe button. To all my current subscribers, thank you so much. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. I would also love for you to visit me on all my other social media accounts. All those links are in my description box below. This project is so fun and easy to do. We're using one of Dollar Tree's 12-inch chunky slats. I'm going to mark that at 8 inches. I took it outside and cut it down with my miter saw, but you could also use your handheld miter saw to cut that. After sanding it down nice and smooth and cleaning that debris off, we're going to give the entire piece 1 coat of Waverly's Antique Wax, and then using a wet wipe, blend it in and wipe any of that excess off. Now let that thoroughly dry, and we're going to take one of Dollar Tree's hanging windmills, and I'm going to remove the hanger on the back just by taking some pliers and unlooping that end. And we're not going to need that for this project, but I always like to save things because you never know when you may need it for a future project. Now you could take the welcome part off at the bottom, but I liked that and I like the wood showing through. You could also cut your slat down to the exact size of the welcome portion, but I wanted some to hang off of each end to give it a little added extra color. Using E6000, I'm going to center that right on top of the slat with the wire piece that's in the back holding the windmill up. That's resting on your wood, and then I'm placing clamps on there to allow that E6000 to set up. Now this was so easy, but it just really adds a lot of beautiful character when you put it with some other pieces. I love how this project turned out, and I really hope you guys like it too. And now for our final project, a barn tissue box holder. Using 2 of these barn-shaped signs from Dollar Tree, I'm going to remove the tags from both, as well as those wooden pieces on the front. I'm using my Arrow staple remover, but you could also use like a Cricut spatula or a putty knife. Just slide it underneath these wood pieces, and they come off very easily. You'll do that for both of the signs, and then for one of the signs, you really want to make sure that you remove all of the paper, or at least get the majority of the paper off, and then sand that down nice and smooth, because you're going to use the back of one of the signs and you'll use the front of the other sign. So the one that you're going to use the front, just make sure it's nice and sanded down. Now don't throw those pieces away that we took off, because we're going to reuse those. We're going to use some of Dollar Tree's wood planks. They come 6 in a pack. So I'm going to flip this over where the front is facing the outside edge on my left. And then you want your chimneys to match. So this is going to have the back side facing to the right. Take one of those planks and hold it up to the peak at the very top where the roof meets. And we're going to hold it off to the side so that we can mark where the chimney's top and bottom pieces are. Then I measured the width of the chimney, and I think it was about 5/8 of an inch. I measured that out on my wood plank and then drew a square so I would know where to cut these. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side for the other chimney. Once I get that marking done, I'm just going to use that as a reference and a guide on the left-hand side to make my marks on the right-hand side. Now, just like before, I'm going to score it with my utility knife a few times. Then I'll use my handheld miter shears. These are listed in my Amazon store in my description box below if you're interested. Once I have the 2 side pieces clipped, I can see the back side of it. I can draw a line to connect the 2 and know where to score that with my utility knife. Once I score it a few times, they'll pop right out. It'll give you a nice clean break. And now I want to make sure that everything's going to fit, but I also want to create an opening at the top since this is going to be a tissue box cover. I'm going to measure out, it was about 2 3/4 of an inch to 4 1/4 of an inch off of the edge. And then I measured down how wide I wanted it to be. And then I just drew my rectangle out and did the same thing as I did on the sides by scoring it and then using my handheld miter shears, and then continue to score it until I'm able to just pop that piece out. Once I have that out, I do go over all of these pieces with some sandpaper to make sure they're nice and smooth. Now I'm going to flip it over to the side, and I'm using one of those planks. This will become the side of our barn, and it is not quite wide enough to go down to the bottom of the barn. So I'm going to measure the distance from the bottom of the roof to the bottom of the barn and see what difference I need to cut out for the bottom piece. So I just cut that the exact same way I did the top pieces. And once I know everything's going to line up, this is how it's going to look once we put it together. So you'll cut one for the other side. So you're going to have 3 full planks for the roof, the one we cut out for the chimney, and then the 2 smaller pieces, and then the 2 pieces that we took off of the front. Now I'm going to go over all of these with a antique wax water mixture. It's more or less 2 parts water, 1 part antique wax. And I'm going over all of those, including the sides and the front and the back on everything, with a lint-free cloth. Set those to the side and let everything dry. Now I'm going to take 2 full planks for the side walls of the barn, as well as painting both of those front pieces of the barn in chalk paint. This is White Cottage made by Folk Art, and it will take a couple of coats on the barn and just 1 coat on those wood planks. So now that everything has dried for those 2 pieces, we're going to set everything to the side except for one of them. And we're going to use some of Dollar Tree's craft sticks. They come 100 in a pack. And I'm going to measure out 2 at 2 inches. We're going to create the window and barn door for this barn. So we're going to repeat this twice because we're going to make the exact same thing for the front and the back of the barns. Then the two side pieces I measured out 1¼ inch. So that's going to make our square window at the top. And then I measured out 2 at 2½ inches for the top and bottom pieces of the barn door. And then 2 at 2¼ inches. Make sure that's nice and squared up before you lay your cross pieces over. Hold those in place and make your marks for where you need to cut out your corners. So I just laid it in the bottom left-hand corner up to the top right-hand corner. Use those handheld miter shears to cut those angles out. And then I'll repeat that for the other one, except I will make a marking in the middle so that I can cut this into 2 separate pieces and everything will sit flush. When we get it all cut out, it won't be overlapping the original cross in the barn door. So once you have everything cut out, if you need to trim any excess off, you can do that now. Just make sure you have everything squared up before you go over and sand each one of these with some sandpaper. So I created the exact same design for the other side of the barn. And once I have everything sanded, I'm going to remove them from the barn, but lay them out exactly the way they need to go back. I'm going to go over all of these with that antique wax water mixture and allow everything to dry. For the barn faces, because we cut those small pieces on the side, I want to create a border for the bottom of each one of these barn faces. So I'm holding that small piece up and I'm going to place some painter's tape right above it so I can have the same width going around from the front and the back. And I'm going to seal that in with some white chalk paint so I don't have any bleed through. Allow your white chalk paint to thoroughly dry, and then I'm going to apply a couple of coats of that water wax mixture, allowing it to dry in between each coat. Then once those dry, you can remove your tape and you have a beautiful crisp line, and it is the perfect width as those bottom pieces. It's going to create a gorgeous border. Now I'm going to take all my pieces and just lay them on the face of the barn so I can make sure that I have everything centered, lined up, and that everything's going to fit. Now because I decided to go in and make that border at the bottom, I realized I know my side pieces at that top window are going to be too tall, so I end up cutting about 1/4 inch off. So actually those side pieces at the top window should be about 1 inch. Once I have everything lined up, centered where I want it to be, I'm going to attach each one of these using hot glue, and I'm starting from the bottom and just working my way up. Now you do not want to glue that top piece with the little chimney part on yet. We're going to do that later on. I was just using this as a guide to make sure everything is centered. Now I can take my barn pieces, have my chimneys facing towards me with the barn doors on the outside. We're going to start with that bottom side piece. I'm using E6000 as well as some hot glue. I'm making sure I don't mix the two. That hot glue is going to hold it temporarily. That E6000 is going to give it that permanent hold. Hold that in place until the hot glue sets. Then I'm going to turn it over on the side and we can attach the white plank for the side wall of the barn. Again, we're going to do that with the same concept with the E6000 and the hot glue. Then I'm going to very carefully rotate it over to the other side, and then I can attach the wall on that side, making sure everything is straight and lined up, and I am making sure that I'm putting everything flush to those outside edges. Then we can add that bottom piece on, and then we can start on our roof. So I'm going to attach the full plank piece right below the chimney with E6000 and hot glue. Set that up. Make sure you have the same amount of spacing on each side for the overlap. Then we can add our piece where the chimney pieces go down into and the opening for our tissues. And then we'll repeat this on the other side of the roof. Once we have those in place, we can go and add those decorative pieces back to the front. This is strictly optional. You don't have to do that. It's just as pretty without it, but I thought it just kind of gave it a little bit more of a finished touch. And then once I have those on there, you can stop right then, but I wanted to add some trim to those outside corners. And I'm using some of those same craft sticks. I'm going to measure all of these and cut them down so the side piece will go underneath that roof line down to the bottom. And then I'll have this front piece go from the bottom up to the top of the roof line. This is going to cover all of those corners and it's really gonna give it more of a high-end finished look. To make the chimney pieces a little bit taller, I'm taking one of Dollar Tree's tumbling tower pieces, marking that and then cutting that down. I've now stained it all with my wax and water mixture, as well as painted those little pieces in the front so that when I put those craft sticks up, you won't see those, as well as I have painted those chimney pieces. It's just going to make everything blend in really well. I'm only going to secure these down with hot glue. They're not really providing any support. They're more or less just decorative. And I'm going to add those side pieces on, and it just gives it just that finished touch on the sides. And then once I get the side pieces on there, I can go in and add my front pieces. That's also going to cover up the seams we have for those side walls, or the planks that we added for the side walls. And I think it just takes it up a notch. It looks so beautiful. You guys would have to let me know if you like it with or without the trim. But once you get all your trim on the front and the back, you can now take a square tissue box and set this over top of it, feed your tissues through that opening, and now the tissue looks like a beautiful little smokestack coming out. You have a gorgeous way to display your tissues now that we are in full pollen season with these itchy, watery eyes and runny noses. You can very cleverly hide those tissue boxes with something very beautiful. If you have a favorite out of today's projects, please let me know in the comments down below. I always love to know which one is your favorite. I want to thank you so much for taking time to watch my video. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Please take care, and I will see you guys next time.